Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and we hope that you enjoyed your lunch. Session 3 looks at the nature of the changes that have taken place. I'm glad to introduce my colleague and old friend from IPI, who is the senior advisor of the Middle East program, Ambassador Abdallah Al-Saidi. Previously, he was the permanent representative of Yemen to the United Nations from 2002 until his resignation in March 2011 in response to the killing of dozens of demonstrators by pro-government forces in Sana'a. He has played a prominent role at the UN in his capacity as permanent representative. He has also held an important government position, including Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs from 1998 to 2002. Abdallah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Andrea, of course, is a friend of mine from New York. So whatever she says, take it with a grain of salt about me. We have an outstanding panel, and I tried to get Andrea permission to speak in Arabic because all the panelists speak Arabic, including the moderator. But Andrea said it's too costly to hire an interpreter for this session. In any case, we have a very important topic: structural or cosmetic changes. What are the political consequences? By way of introduction, you know that the Arab uprising of 2011, otherwise known in the West as the Arab Spring, in some quarter the Arab Awakening, in Iran the Islamic Awakening, and so on. Some of them, as has been pointed out this morning, are now in a state of transition. And transitions are always violent, tumultuous, and unpredictable. This is the case in Latin America. This is the case with all transitions that are violent and unpredictable. But successful transitions could be gauged by how profound and democratic is the change. And the jury is still out with respect to the Arab Spring countries. And the legitimacy of the new elites who are taking over from authoritarian regimes will be a function of their respect for democratic norms. I think Dr. El-Eriani today spoke about the Islamicists, whether we are going to have one election one time or whether they are going to respect the norms of democracy. But in transitions, and this was the case as raised today by Terry Larson, the economic situation is very central to the success of transition or lack of success of transitions. In Paris in 1848, they marched and they raised loaves of bread. In the Arab Spring, beside dignity and integrity and the freedom to speak, freedom to move, and so on, the economic deprivation was highlighted. It is one of the essential issues. And everyone wish the Arab countries to move to democracy, to be democratized. And here, what's in transition, incidentally, what makes a transition successful is geography. The more the neighborhood is hospitable to change, the aspired change, the more likely it will take place. But if the neighborhood is hostile, then the road will be bumpy and difficult. I don't want to take long in terms of the introduction. I want to introduce the outstanding panelists we have today. To my right is Mohammed Abdul Aziz, who is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Libya. Mr. Mohammed Abdul Aziz served in international organizations in the UN in various capacity, I guess, including Vienna on drugs, if that is the case. He went to Cairo University and also St. John's University in New York. Mr. Vladimir Dudushkin from he's the Chief Advisor of the Middle East and North Africa Department in the Foreign Ministry in Moscow. But Vladimir was a diplomat in Yemen, both Yemens, yes, before unification. And his Arabic is superb. So I'm not going to say anything in Arabic so that he will not catch what I say. But he knows Yemen quite well. And then I have the third panelist is Volker Perthes. And Mr. Perthes is a professor at two great German universities. He's professor at Humboldt, one of the oldest institutions in Germany, and he's also a professor at the Free University in Berlin. He's working now as chairman director of the Stiftung Wissenschaft and Politik, the German institute.
You pronounce it very well, Watson.
I was in East Germany, I told you before. International and Security Affairs in Berlin. And with that, I will ask first, the first panelist, to give us a general remark from each one of them, and then we will open the floor for interactive discussion. And I will start with Mohammed to my right.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Let me first express my deep gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense in Austria and to the International Peace Institute for inviting me to contribute to this session. And I came with quite personal feeling, because back in 1979, I was one of those who benefited from the Peace Academy training as far as international negotiations and third parties concerned. So practically, while I joined that seminar back in 79 as a trainee, I'm happy today that I'm joining the Institute in giving some expose, in particular about Libya case. Talking about the revolution in Libya should not be disconnected from the past. And with the permission, Mr. Ambassador, I just wanted to highlight just 5 issues. One is, if one take into account that the Kingdom of Libya, which was established as a result of the independence in 1959, was kidnapped for 42 years. During that period, a number of issues that have to be kept in mind in historical perspective. And that's why I say always the Libyan people are not lucky, because they have not had the chance since independence almost 61 years ago. Until now, they have not had a chance to think, they have not had the chance to prosper. The 5 political phases that we have gone through from the 1951 until 69, which was the constitutional monarchy. And one of the colleagues, we were talking about Libya, and I say that back in 1956, Libya was considered as the poorest country in the world. By the time the oil started being produced in the beginning of the 60s, people started feeling there is a minimum of development. The coup d'etat in 69 came. I have to do justice to the previous regime, because from 69 to 77, probably there was the best period in Libya at that time, because the development process went quite well. From 1997 until the revolution took place, there are a number of serious problems. From 77 to 88, probably the most difficult time where the country has witnessed serious problems, economic problems, kidnapping, liquidation of opponents, maltreatment in prisons, deteriorating education, deteriorating health. It was not easy, really, for the Libyan people at that time, not to speak of the fact that the private sector was completely destroyed. Then it came the sanctions from 93 until 2003. Practically for 1 decade, Libya has gone through difficult times as a result of Lockerbie case. When the sanctions were lifted in 2003, the previous regime projected the image of victory because Gaddafi felt that he succeeded in convincing the international community to lift the sanctions. So Libya became the property of the Gaddafi regime and the Gaddafi family. Every single inch in Libya, every single individual became somehow the servant of the previous family. Now, the revolution took place on the 17th of February. It is unprecedented for young people to move in the street empty-handed, voicing their concern for a change and the destruction of a dictatorial regime. 80% of those in the streets have not been trained in the military. They have not had weapons in their hands. And therefore, when people criticize us for accepting the intervention of the NATO, we told them that had it been the case that NATO has not intervened, 80% of the Libyan people would have been destroyed, and the rest will be servants of the regime. That was the historical fact that should be documented, because while we are very concerned about the 50,000 martyrs who lost their life, it's a huge human cost. At the same time, the destruction of infrastructure, but we still feel that it was a success with the help of the NATO, the European Union, and the friends, the countries stood beside us, that were able to secure the destruction of the dictatorship in Libya. Now, what are the challenges at the moment? From my point of view, the most difficult part was not the destruction and the getting rid of the dictatorship. What's more important and more difficult at the moment is this stage. Are we capable of building a democratic state with the rule of law and good governance? What are the main challenges at the moment vis-a-vis the revolution? One, the security, which is either internal or external. To what extent we are able to embark on transitional justice program that is viable? Three, are we able to conduct a serious national reconciliation? Four, are we able to rebuild our justice system, our interior system, our defense? Fifth, are we able to start reconstruction at times when the security situation prevailing is not at the expected level? Fifth, preparing for the elections. Are we able to conduct free and fair elections or not? What are the prospects for the future? This morning, I've seen the colleagues who have taken the floor, some of them quite optimistic about the Arab Spring, and others are quite pessimistic. I think we should be optimistic as far as the Arab Spring is concerned, as far as Libya is concerned. What are the prospects in the future? To what extent that we are confident that Libya could sail through and not is going to be a failed state? First, what we need is the continuation and the sustainability of the bilateral, multilateral, and regional engagement. We are very grateful for the support that you are giving to us bilaterally, multilaterally, or regionally. But that support should be sustained, because the most critical stage in building democracy in Libya is now. Second, to what extent we can embark on a national reconciliation program? It will be a lie politically if someone would say that in Libya we can build democratic institutions in the absence of a very successful national reconciliation program. The message is how to teach our people to be tolerant and how to teach those who are involved in crimes to have the ability and the courage to apologize. In Libya, national reconciliation is not going to be easy. Rest assured of that. It's not going to take 6 months or 1 year. It will take years because the atrocities were immense. Rape, destruction, mass graves. The dignity of 50,000 martyrs together with their families is in a question mark. In a tribal society, it is so difficult for them to swallow the idea of rape in a traditional society. It's very hard. And you have heard about the problems that we have. The fourth challenge that we have to take into account, to what extent we will be able to cultivate a culture of human rights and fundamental freedoms. We are not offended by being criticized for certain abuses of human rights. To the contrary, the more we are criticized at the moment, the more we feel we have an inner drive to move forward. The fifth point I would like to mention to you is how to reconstruct and how to open the investment for foreign affairs, foreign investment. It is very unfortunate at this particular moment that 98% of the budget of Libya depends on oil. It is difficult at this stage to have $168 billion as frozen assets abroad, and yet we are unable to bring at least 30%, 40% of these funds back to pump it in the reconstruction. We talk about diversification of the economy. We should not depend only on oil. To what extent that countries that have proper technology can help us to move forward. It is not easy to say that there is a roadmap, but the roadmap that could be put has to have these so-called enabling factors. I consider Libya like a shell at the moment. I consider Libya like, if I may say with respect to other technologies, like an excellent German engine that lacks the gasoline. What we need is the gasoline that makes this engine move. We cannot do it alone. We have to have support either at the political level or at the economic level or the capacity building level. One of the issues I would like to put it in front of you is there is a serious problem as far as international cooperation in criminal matters. During the last few weeks, we have discovered a number of elements in Libya, quite active, belonging to the previous regime. The way we do have the presence of the leading figures of the previous regime in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Morocco, in Niger, in Chad, they are very active. They have the strategic thinking. They know the country. They know the gaps. They have the funds and they have the weapons. Intelligence information is indicative of the fact that they are planning. We have caught a number of elements in Libya with the tendency of assassinations, destruction of public properties. Now, what we are trying to do at the moment, to ask our friends, countries who do host these elements, to be kind enough to respond to our extradition requests. It is extremely important to ensure fair trial to these people. Without having this type of cooperation at the judicial level, it will be very difficult for us to ensure a minimum of stability inside the country. And therefore, we are really trying to get this message across in order to be able to ensure that without the outside support from friendly countries, Libya will remain and the process of transition will be prolonged. For your information, the challenge of election at the moment, and sometimes there are some question marks about the timely organization of the elections. Yesterday, the date closed with about 2.6 million registered, represents about 80% of the voters who are expected to vote, which is a good sign. There was over 2,500 people who are candidates for the General National Congress. What is really nice in Libya at the moment, and it's a surprise to me too, that for the last 40 years, we talk about women empowerment, we talk about civil society organizations. For your information, in Libya, in 5 months' time, there is 4,000 NGOs and associations, and civil society organizations have been established. Libya has not seen the culture of political parties. Within the last few months, almost more than 100 political parties have been established. Probably this is an exaggeration, but it does demonstrate that the Libyans in general are very much thirsty to see a real change and to embark a real democracy in Libya. And with these words, Mr. Ambassador, I will conclude by saying that we'll be more than pleased to hear your questions and your comments, and we'll be more than happy to give you some more feedback given the constraints of time that we have.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this interesting discourse. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, but I will ask you to answer them after we hear the 2 panelists. One, the first question, which is disturbing, is this tension, regional tension between the different parts of Libya. Tension between the East and the West, which I admit Gaddafi exacerbated the schism, the tension between the Benghazi in the East and Tripoli in the West. And the second thing, I wanted the problem in the Sabha area in the south and in the west in Zawara. There are a lot of tensions which I think might impede smooth transitions in Libya. The second question I want to ask you, and it has been disturbing, the spillover from Libya to Tunis, especially of the Salafist elements, which the Tunisian army twice or 3 times have encountered in the border between Libya and Tunis. And in this connection, also the spillover of the problem of the Tawarak, who took part in the war in Libya on Gaddafi's side, I believe, and now created havoc in Mali, which already divided the country of Mali into 2. I want you to answer this, but after we hear the 2 other speakers, and I will begin with Vladimir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, of course, I would like to express my gratitude to organize such a good conference, and especially to Dr. Rod Larsson personally, and to Minister of Defense and Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Austria for this great attention to events developing in the Middle East. I consider that's very important. Frankly, I prepared a long report for about 40 minutes, and prepared to read it. But unfortunately, my president and chairman explained me in Arabic that it should be only 5 minutes. So I would give you only some ideas of this report. Well, and try to explain something myself. You see, I would like to concentrate on the idea how to deal with the crisis in the Middle East, how to deal with the Arab Spring, what to do with all these processes, very difficult and complicated, and how we foreigners looking abroad on this region, looking from great distance from United States, from Europe, how we should act and what should be our steps regarding this very complicated situation that is now appeared in the Middle East and North Africa. And from this point, I would transfer very smoothly to Syria, because speaking frankly, I'm dealing with Syria in my ministry, and I'm responsible for relations with Syria, and I know everything about it, day and night working on this issue. Maybe this issue is also interesting, because previous panel asked many questions. Why Russia didn't do that? Why Russia didn't do that? Why Russia imposed veto? And many times. And what is the position of Russia and China? And it is very surprising. I think that there's nothing is surprising. It's absolutely understandable and logical. And even children could answer these questions that our distinguished professor from Institute of Strategic Studies of Great Britain asked. Well, I will begin from just general ideas. Of course, Russia follows closely development of events unfolding in the Middle East and North Africa. And the situation is very far from stability there. The consequences of the transformation taking place there will make troubles for a long time. We are sure in that. From the beginning, we fully support the desire of Middle East people for better life, for social, economic, right, development. However, we cannot ignore that certain forces are trying to use these events of the Arab Spring to settle accounts on regional and domestic political arena. In this regard, we advocate peaceful, that is what is our formula in general for Middle East and North Africa. We advocate peaceful, evolutionary change, which should not pay by price of lives of thousands and thousands of civilians, the price of hardship and destruction. We condemn the violence from whatever it comes. This applies to actions of the state and governments, especially when they lead to deaths of innocent civilians, as well as it applies to opposition parties' actions. I must admit that various extremist forces use the slogan of better life to resort to provocations against the state agencies and institutions, and that is also a bloodshed. All the players involved in the Middle East situation must respect the principle of no interference into international affairs, into internal affairs of the state. And I stress that Russia doesn't protect one or another political regime, as well as in Syria. I'll speak about it a little bit later. We advocate a strict adherence to rules and principles of international law. Adaptation of so-called Libyan model to other Middle East states covered by the revolutionary events is unacceptable by our view. Please tell me if somebody from you can tell me that in accordance with international law, somewhere in any charter of United Nations, anywhere, is written that any regime or any leader of the country could be changed or replaced by power from abroad, I will give this person a big gift. Already in my hotel, the gift is ready. Well, but I'm absolutely sure that you will never find anywhere any ideas of such a sort. So that is Russian position. We would like to adhere this position, and we would like to continue this line. So we are for peaceful and for peaceful settlement of all crises that is taking place in the region. The reaction of international community of internal processes in individual states should be extremely responsible and verified. It is important not to add fuel into the fire, not to hinder the efforts to launching national dialogue in the countries where there are unrest and uprising, not to instigate to the intransigence and the use of weapons. That is our general understandings. I think that everybody can agree with that logic, but unfortunately not all the countries, not every country of the world is acting in accordance of this clear and understandable logic. Now, for speaking about Syria, we also adhere to a clear line on peaceful settlement for Syria crisis through political and diplomatic means, with the principle of cessation of violence by all parties through comprehensive dialogue and non-interference. Common approaches of the international community have been outlined with the emphasis on supporting the efforts of the UN and Arab League Special Envoy to Syria, Mr. Kofi Annan. In the Russian Federation, we supported his mission from the first day. We also supported the mission of Arab League and Arab observers in Syria. We were disappointed and didn't understand why these observers were withdrawn by Arab League without any explanation of the reason. They worked very fruitful and resultful, and we expected that their reports will bring to us a light on what is happening in Syria. Because you see, not picking what is written in my paper, but taking into account only information that is coming from London, and how I remember how it's called, Observer Human Rights station or something like that in Great Britain, that is giving information for everybody about what's happening in Syria. So that is, we try to investigate these small organizations. It's only 2 persons without education, high education, and they are providing all the world with information about what is happening in how many casualties and who killed whom, and that is absolutely surprising. So in Russia, we would like to see understandable, clear facts, what is really on the ground. And only international observers can bring to us this information. So Kofi Annan plan and observer mission, that is already about 270 people, and 4 Russian officers there. We would like to increase number of Russian officers there, already working, and we expect to receive a clear picture about the situation in the country. Regarding our information, Syrians are cooperating very actively with the mission of Annan, and mission of Annan have no any reasons to criticize Syrian side how they fulfill their obligations. So, but in any case, we should hear this information openly in the Security Council and elsewhere. I also would like to pay attention to a very important factor: how to find solution of Syrian crisis, what to do. The question is for everybody, what to do. In this regard, I would say that unfortunately attempts to push the Syrian opposition to confrontation with the regime, to overthrow it, are being continued, and that is very dangerous. There is no other way to understand promises of financial and military assistance to armed opposition, which have been announced at the meetings of so-called Group of Friends of Russia. I say so-called because we are not taking part in these meetings. Such approach, in our judgment, don't contribute to the implementation of the decisions taken by the Security Council, and contradict completely with the mission of Kofi Annan. They only increase the threat of civil war, followed with unpredictable consequences for the Middle East region. We are convinced that if the situation in this country would develop according to the negative scenario, I mean collapse, slide to the civil war, external intervention, the dominant role will immediately play the extremist forces with the strong confessional positions, and this is fraught with the sprawl of the conflict to the neighboring countries. At the same time, those who encourage Syrian opposition to the military pressure on the government, in fact, play in favor of the most implacable and intransigent forces like Al-Qaeda. We are sure in that, and thus bring the situation into the deadlock and endless escalation of the violence. I would like to stress again that we don't see an alternative to Kofi Annan plan. All other options, including the returning the issue to the Security Council in order to adopt a stronger resolution. There is idea to adopt a strong resolution to press much more on Syrian regime. We consider that such steps absolutely useless. They don't lead to any positive changes on the ground. It could be taken, such a decision, but they will not bring to any positive results on the ground. We are sure that the external actors should pursue a very responsible approach to implement the Kofi Annan plan comprehensively. They must act in accordance with the United Nations Security Council framework and stimulate all Syrian sides to proceed to the inclusive political process. From our point of view, it is absolutely unacceptable to hit confrontation mood of the opposition, to create illusion that they have the possibility to ease military solution by relying on West powers. It's wrong. Moreover, it is inadmissible to supply weapons to opposition and stimulate traffic militants to Syrian territory. Well, and now I'll make a small conclusion on what I have told you. Now we think in Moscow that now it's not a time to search for the guilty, who began and who is responsible. Of course, Syrian government made a lot of mistakes from the beginning when they began their suppression on peaceful demonstrations and manifestations. Many casualties. Well, but now we see that opposition is already weaponized. They have very good weapon coming from abroad. They have a lot of resources, money resources, and they are resisting with power. They also are killing people, as well as the government killing people. Who is responsible, and who is this blood? And who should go to the international court is the question. Well, of course, government is much stronger. Of course, they have army. They have a lot of possibilities, but they are responsible for security in their own country. Who should provide security for the people? Government. It's their business, not opposition. So they do their business, and maybe they do their business not very well. But in any case, we should try to understand both sides. In Moscow, we have meetings with opposition every week. They coming from Turkey, from London, from Paris. They coming from Syria itself. We're discussing with them situation. Unfortunately, so far, it's very difficult to convince them to sit at the table of negotiations with Syrian regime, our Syrian government. But I can tell you that it is the only one solution of Syrian crisis, if not military, if not international or foreign interference into Syrian affairs, only one solution. It's political dialogue, including Syrian government, because Syrian government is the main player in this game. And when some people and some leaders of the country say, look, but this regime is illegal, this regime is not legitimate. Well, after that, how can you convince opposition to speak with this regime, where everybody in the United States, in Great Britain, in France, say that regime is not legitimate? Well, on another side, foreign opposition or opposition that is acting abroad has a lot of foreign support, financial support and military support. If you have a lot of money in your pocket, and if somebody is saying to you that this man, he is illegal, he's wrong, would you speak with him? Never. You will fight against him because you should justify your money having in your pocket. That is unfortunately what we have with a group of friends. We cannot agree with this logic. Now I return back to Yemen experience in this regard, and I finish. Well, you see, many people say, let's use Yemen experience for Syria. It's good, it's possible. But look, group of friends of Yemen included representatives of Yemen government. And they also participated in all discussions together with all opposition, and they take decisions. And after that, this decision was approved by Security Council. Well, now in Yemen, some parties would like to impose decision from abroad, from a side, not like in Yemen, and say, let's use Yemen experience. How we can use Yemen experience without Syrian government itself, without their participation? And group of friends never invite Syrian government. I cannot understand for what reason. Why Yemen representatives were invited into the group and why Syrian representatives were not invited into the same group. A lot of blood. Yemen was the same, a lot of bloodshed. So we in Moscow found in this policy double standards, nothing else, only double standards. Let's try to understand situation. So, of course, we could compel opposition to sit at the table of negotiations only all together. Now we reached international agreement in Security Council. We have common view in Security Council. We adopted resolution 2043, and Russia was initiator of this resolution, and some countries made amendments. Well, it's a resolution for mission of Kofi Annan. Well, so now we have unity. Let's continue this line. Let's try to avoid military action. And I also call our West colleagues from West countries to step back a little bit in their already taken decision. They already took decision that Syrian government not legitimate. If government is not legitimate, how it could play active role as a player in the dialogue? I don't know how to make it, how to go aside, go back. I don't know, but it should be done something. That is what Russia, how we look at the situation, and we think that Syrian experience and situation in Syria could be used by all other countries and taking into account. That's all. Thank you very much. I took much more time than I was going to have.
It's okay, Vladimir, but I will have to ask you some questions, and I will ask you to reserve reply until we hear from Volker. First of all, Vladimir, people don't say the Syrian regime is illegitimate. People say the Syrian regime lost legitimacy, because once you use the means of oppression against your people, then your legitimacy and credibility becomes a question mark. Second, I understand Vladimir abhorrence of using violence to effect regime change. But I want to remind you, and I want to ask you this question. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, used to say that he wants the Yemeni model applied to Syria. And incidentally, the Arab League model, the Arab League plan for Syria was exactly modeled on the Yemenis. Had Bashar al-Assad, no, later I will ask you, and I will give you the floor. Has Bashar al-Assad accepted the Arab League, then transfer power will go to Shara, his trustful vice president, and then negotiations between the opposition and the regime. This is what the Arab plan. What was unfortunate, Vladimir, is Russia refused to include the Arab League in the Security Council resolution relevant to Syria. So my question is why? Why? Russia was a power that always challenged the status quo. Now Russia is the power that wants to preserve the status quo, however oppressive. This is the question I want to ask you, but you will answer after Volker gives his outstanding discourse.
Of course.
We'll wait whether it's outstanding or not, but I guess my 5 minutes will be about 5 minutes shorter than the 5 minutes that my colleague here took. So being a think tanker, let me try to be a little bit analytical and probably go into some of the questions which you actually put into the header of this panel in the program. First, perhaps on on change and whether change is permanent or revocable. I really think that what we are seeing in the Arab world is irreversible, not in the sense that we have a linear development towards liberal democracy, I wish, but that's not what you're going to see, but in the sense that things will not become again as they were before in none of the countries, even those who seem to be unaffected today but aren't really unaffected because there's a lot of things working underground, even in countries that haven't seen a uprising in the proper sense. I will steal a quote from a Emirati friend of mine, and I think it captures the reality well. He said after 1 year, a little bit more in a year of the Arab uprisings, the people in the Arab world have become bigger and the leaders have become smaller, and that goes for all the countries. I mean, even in, let's say, the Arab Emirates, where you didn't have any demonstrations, or in Qatar, or in Algeria, where there was rather few, or in Iraq, leaders have to take people's opinion and the fact that people find themselves as citizens much more into consideration than a year and a half ago. So much as to what will not change. Of course, we don't know how exactly developments will be proceed. We could say, let us use another metaphor, that the Arab world is experiencing its historical hour. And here's a comparison to Eastern Europe in 1989. That was a historical hour for Eastern Europe. Today, there is a historical hour for the Arab world, which doesn't mean that it's the same, but it is an historical hour. But then one could also, and I want to drive that metaphor on, what we have seen in the last 15 or 16 months or so were only just the first 5 minutes of that historical hour. So expect a decade at least of turbulence to be with us here. And of course, different Arab states are reacting differently to the pressure that is coming from society, and the pressure is different in different countries. Countries differ as to their history, as to their political culture. It does make a difference whether you have known from Pharaoh's time what your state is, or whether your state has been created by colonial powers. It does make a difference for people in terms of identity, for example. It does make a difference what kind of resource endowment your state has, and whether states are able to buy off at least some of the opposition or some of the unhappiness of people. So there are a lot of differences, but change is there for the entire region, and we shouldn't be too sure. I think in the past, let me say one thing on European policies, we have too often confused stability with stagnation. We saw something that didn't move, which is political stagnation, and we thought it was stability. And we shouldn't make that mistake again and say that some states look very stable now, so they will remain stable forever. That's not the case. That may be just another sign of stagnation, where change will come at a moment when we don't expect it. So I spoke about turbulence. And of course, I don't know how the next years are going to proceed, but what, as an analyst, as a think tanker, I can do is try to speak about where we should look, where policymakers should look, where scholars should look, where think tanks should look, where diplomats should look. And I think there are 4 factors which are extremely important to look into. Some of them we spoke about this morning, but let me try to sort of synthesize that. I'll probably add a little bit. The first is still socio-demographic situation in these countries. Now, we all know that these uprisings were triggered by one generation, basically those between 20 and 35, who constitute a little bit then more than 1/3 of the populations of most of these countries. Now, 1 year, or a little bit more than 1 year into the start of this generationally triggered uprising, the socioeconomic situation for this generation hasn't changed to the positive. I think Terje Rødt-Larsen in his initial presentation said so much. But also the representatives of this generation that triggered the revolutions and the uprisings haven't been those who benefited politically from the elections that took place. Or you could put it differently, those who won the elections, the first free and fair elections in Tunisia and in Morocco and other places, those who won these elections have not been the ones who made them possible. And those who made them possible have not been winning the elections. So be prepared for more trouble here. This generation has already once tasted power. They were able to overthrow dictators or autocrats, and they may do it again, and they may even challenge elected authorities. So that's factor one. Expect more trouble on a socio-demographic basis. And also add to that, that in some countries, I think of Saudi Arabia, for example, the equivalent of the generational cohort that made the revolution in Egypt or Tunisia is just being educated today. They will probably come to the fore in 5, 6, 7 years from now. Second factor we still have to watch is, I think sometimes ignored too much, is the military. Now, the military in Egypt has been helpful in the beginning. It has not been so helpful in the last couple of months. We will see how helpful it is once a new president is elected. But I think especially Western observers or international observers should very carefully watch the role of the military in the Arab countries. I would not exclude attempts to have a military backlash here and there if elections don't actually bring the results some military leaders think they could live with. So simply be aware that the military is still there. It is very important for the future of the development in countries like Yemen, of course in countries like Syria, of course in Algeria, of course in Iraq and some other places. The third factor we already discussed extensively this morning, that is of course political Islam. And what I really find fascinating and interesting here is the way the political opening, or the opening of the political system, and of course we can most clearly see that in Egypt, the opening of the political system leads to a pluralization of political Islam. Splits to the right, splits to the left, I mean that's very much a European metaphor, splits to the right, splits to the left from what was the one mainstream Muslim brotherhood, mainstream Islamist tendency. And this, I think, is the most interesting thing to watch. Where will the different shades of green develop to? And will the mainstream Islamists, Muslim brotherhoods and their brothers, as it were, in other countries, Nahda Party, etc., will they, as I sometimes think they do the Sarkozy and try to reach out to the utter right in their countries in order to regain a constituency which otherwise may be captured by ultra-conservative Islamists, or will they try to emulate the Turkish model in the way that they form a party which tries to be pragmatic both in socio-cultural affairs as well as in foreign policy affairs? We simply don't know, and we don't have an answer here. But this is where we have almost no influence upon, except being open, dialoguing with everybody there, certainly everybody who is elected, but it is probably the most interesting domestic policy factor to watch. The liberals in the Arab countries, which, well, we have been trying to work together even before the fall of the regime, are in Egypt or in Tunisia, are unfortunately so disorganized and so small that we shouldn't only look for the liberals, only put our wishes towards the liberals, but we have to watch what is happening inside political Islam. And I do think we will have, well, sort of ultra-conservative Islamists in parliaments, and we will have Muslim Democrats who think that the Christian democracy of Europe is a model for them, only that they are Muslims and not Christians. And the fourth factor, of course, to watch as something that having impact on the development, on the situation on the ground, is regional geopolitics. And Vladimir here already talked about it, and our friend from Libya to an extent also. We are seeing that we are having real local popular revolutions and uprising that immediately have gained a regional and sometimes an international dimension. Of course, that has a lot of things to do with sort of people from Morocco to Iraq speaking basically the same language, watching the same media. So it's very easy for revolutions and revolutionary slogans to travel and to migrate. Revolutions tend to migrate anyway, but if people speak the same language and have a certain cultural affinity, it goes even quicker. But we also see the other way, that regional developments and regional competition, regional geopolitical competition is impacting on the situation on the ground in individual countries. And I think Syria is the best or the worst example here. We are having an uprising in Syria which is originally local, peaceful, for dignity, for humanity, for democracy, for participation, against corruption and authoritarianism. But it has been overlaid, this struggle inside Syria already has been overlaid by a struggle about Syria, which is very much becoming a regional struggle, geopolitical struggle. It's about the reach of Iran into the Levant. It's about who should have influence in Damascus after the fall of the regime, which will come at some point. We don't know when. So we have this overlay here, or this overlap, it's an overlay actually, of regional geopolitical power struggle over what is happening on the ground. And that makes it so difficult also for Westerners to understand, because we are still, and I'm not excluding any particular country here, I'm not including all, but I'm not excluding any, we are still having, let me say, something like a Cold War view on the Arab world, where we want to distinguish enemies from friends. And we want to have countries where we can say, oh, these are our friends and the others are our opponents. And in reality, it's not like that. We are seeing that Iraq, which apparently is a US client, isn't it, is supporting the Assad regime. We are seeing that Saudi Arabia, which apparently is our friend, and Qatar, which is even more our friend, is supporting the Salafists in Egypt, which concerns the moderate Islamists a lot. So we're having a lot of cross-cutting trends here, which are much too complex for Western policymakers to trying to play around with them and do political engineering or trying to exploit them. So the only thing I guess we can do here is let's concentrate on what we have not been very good at in the past, that is work on trying to help solve the geopolitical conflicts which are still unresolved in the region. Someone spoke this morning about Morocco and Algeria. I think the European Union could do a lot here to try to help these two countries to get their act together and probably open their borders. But of course, even more important, we are having the Arab-Israeli conflict, which we all have been silent about in the last, well, at least in the last year and a half, or since President Obama gave up on solving it in his first year in office, as he promised when he came into office 4 years ago. And there is, of course, what is happening today in Baghdad. These are the negotiations between the six powers and Iran, which I think are extremely important in order to avoid further conflagration in the Middle East. Let me finish with saying what I think the main risks are, and I basically mentioned most of them. The first risk is something, I think our Egyptian friend this morning sort of mentioned it in her own words, is something what I call the stolen revolutions phenomena. And we have heard that from Yemen. I mean, those people who triggered the revolutions, who triggered political change, suddenly seeing themselves being outside of the new game. And they will challenge new authorities, I'm quite sure. Maybe it takes 30 years for them to actually be in power. Shouldn't be so astonishing. Remember that the people who made cultural revolutions in 1968 in Europe, East Europe and West Europe actually, Poland, Germany, plus Los Angeles, that these people, it took them 30 years to get government positions in Poland, in Germany, in France, in other countries. So it needs a lot of strategic patience, but strategic patience is not what usually youth is endowed with, and therefore they are making revolutions, and that's the course of history. So that is the first risk, the stolen revolutions phenomenon. The second risk, I think, is military backlashes. We shouldn't totally exclude it. The third risk is what I would call Islamist marginalization. I don't mean the marginalization of the Islamists. That is what we had under Mubarak and Ben Ali. There the Islamists were marginalized, which wasn't good. The risk I see today is Islamist marginalization in a way that Islamist parties take power democratically, but then they are unable, even though they would like to, they are unable sort of to engage positively with the world, with globalization, and they would marginalize their own country. We can probably help them on a technical level to get out of this marginalization, but it is a real risk. And of course, a fourth risk would be new geopolitical conflicts, particularly between Israel and Iran or around Iran. And here, I guess, is the main responsibility of the West, if I may say so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volker, for very stimulating analytical discourse. One question only. We talked today about the Turkish model. I expressed my view on the Turkish model. The Tunisian army was professional. The Yemeni army split. the Syrian army sadly is taking the side of the regime. The Egyptian army position might resemble, in the long run, the role of the Turkish military. Will you reflect on this in that? I will now ask the panelists to answer the questions, but very briefly, because we want to give the outstanding people here the chance to ask questions. And I will ask by Vladimir.
Yes, your questions to me. First question, that Syrian government, from point of view of some countries, lost legality. It's not illegal, but lost legality. Of course, you see, I didn't see principal differences in that. I think that these statements made by leaders of some countries, West countries and East countries and Arab countries, many countries. Russia is in minority, but I would like to tell you that minority is not always not right. Sometimes it is right. Well, we didn't recognize this slogan, and we didn't recognize with idea that Syrian government lost its legality, or Syrian regime lost its legality. Well, and we consider that this step taken by some countries were rather premature, and it was a mistake by some states who said this idea, who expressed this idea very quickly, even in September or October, when the crisis was just developing. And now this thesis is making obstacle and hamper the process or reconciliation and process of putting, as I told you, all opposition and the Syrian government together to find solution of the crisis. Well, the second question, that is, as I told you, that Russia liked so much Arab League observers, and when they were withdrew, Russia was even, as I told you, approximately was about to cry. And then we were against including this idea into the resolution of Security Council. It is not a little bit not correct that we, Russia, were not against mentioning of decision of Arab, reference to the decision of Arab League in the resolutions of Security Council. It was another problem that when we began to discuss resolutions, well, you know that Russia two times used the right of veto, and two new resolutions were endorsed. Well, when we imposed veto and when we discussed all these resolution Security Councils, some members of Security Council tried to impose idea that not Arab League observer mission should be mentioned in the text, but the decision of Arab League on the 22nd of November. And this decision is the basic idea of this decision, that the authorities from the President Bashar should be transferred to his Vice President Farouk Shara. And first of all, it is already decided that President Bashar, even in July, said that he transferred all his authorities for negotiations with opposition and creation of government of reconciliation to Farouk Shara. It was already decided, but no one wants even to listen and recognize it, especially opposition. They close their ears. Well, and the second thing, you see, we absolutely sure that to mention in the text of the resolution a reference to this decision of Arab League is wrong. Why? It's wrong. Why it's wrong? Because it's only Syrian people can decide how will be organized the process of transference of authorities from that or this or that, from president to vice president. It's only Syrians themselves, Syrian people should say how it should be done, but not we are foreigners in Security Council. Despite Security Council is the basic organ of international law. We should not try to impose this decision from abroad, even in Security Council. And Security Council should not take on itself its responsibility. It's wrong. That is why we were always against any references to this decision of Arab League. And there are references in the text on the resolution on the all decisions of Arab League. So this formula, rather vague, is acceptable for us. But especially mentioning the decision of 22nd of November, we were against it, because we cannot agree with this decision of Arab League. We support Arab League, but not this decision.
Thank you. Mohammed?
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, you have asked me two questions, but before that, I would like just to make a general comments on Syria. Our colleague Vladimir has very much emphasized the Kofi Annan and the military observers operation in Syria. From my point of view, and also the debate that I did follow for the last 50 years about the need to protect the civilians as an obligation of the international community. We cannot continue to see the civilians being killed for the sake of not changing a regime or another. It is very hard to understand. The debate when we had back in 75, 76, 77, when the international community was drafting the 2 additional protocols to Geneva Conventions, at that time when they spoke, the experts spoke about the national conflicts. One of the key issues that was highlighted, there was no disagreement, was the need to protect civilians at that time, according to international humanitarian law. It is very hard to see at this particular moment, when 38 years after the conclusion of the 2 additional protocols, we see the civilians are being killed and nobody is doing anything about it. Not to mention the fact that this idea of military observers, I've been in 3 peacekeeping operations before, from Namibia to former Yugoslavia to Western Sahara. The main role of the military observers is to monitor and report. It means that a military observer, you are paid to monitor and you are paid to report. It means you see the type of killings every day and you report how many people are killed. They do not have the power to react to stop these atrocities. And therefore, I hope that the culture of these military observers in the future within the United Nations should really start thinking seriously about the viability of military observers when it comes to real conflict situation where the civilians are being killed every day. Now, going back, Mr. Ambassador, to your questions about the tension between East Libya and West Libya. And federalism. It is historical. And during the last 40 years, Gaddafi regime deprived the eastern part of Libya because I think the 3rd coup d'etat that took place in Libya was in the eastern part. And he had to victimize the people of the East for years and years just because there was a coup d'etat in that area. They were deprived economically, they were deprived socially, and there are certain spots in the East were considered until now one of the poorest areas in Libya. And therefore, the feelings at this stage of our people in the East, they are a little bit concerned that the new regime in Libya, when we established the law and the state of the rule of law and good governance, they may not be able to ensure that they have the equal rights like in the Western side. So it's not only new, it is historical as far as the East and the West is concerned. Not to speak of the fact that federalism is not that much, in terms of public awareness, is not that much understood in Libya. Federalism sometimes can be very healthy in other countries, as we see in many countries in the world. But to what extent the Libyan community could understand the advantages of the federalism has to be seen. Now about Sabha. Sabha is in the south, as you know, and I am fully convinced that if there is a problem for Libya in the future, it will come from the south, for 2 reasons. We have about 4,000 kilometers of land borders. The most part that is vulnerable is the south. Not to speak of the fact that some of the elements of the previous regime are now stationed in Niger, to the extent that the son of Gaddafi was given a Nigerian passport, and I have seen it myself 3 days ago, a passport that is born in Niger. So he has the right, not to speak of the fact that a few weeks ago, he was given a diplomatic passport, and the Minister of Interior said that we were pressed by one of the countries in order to give a diplomatic passport to Bashir Saleh, who is a billionaire that is now financing some of the operation from outside. And therefore, the vulnerability in the South to continue to be there, unless we have real support in terms of border control and border security, the problems will continue to come from the South. And therefore, what happened in Sabha, Mr. Ambassador, is not only a tribal conflict, which is true. Historically, the so-called Tabu and the other tribes in the Sabha, they had historically a number of conflicts because Gaddafi was clever enough to divide and rule. So he deprives one tribe against the other for the sake of getting the other tribe to be with him. That was the doctrine that was applied very much by Gaddafi. And therefore, for those people who simplify the conflict in the South as a tribal, it is not true. It is tribal, but at the same time has connections with other elements who are staying in the neighboring countries. One of the colleagues, as you rightly put, Mr. Chairman, regarding the situation in Mali, it is very true that thousands of people who fought with Gaddafi from some African origin have left to Niger, to Chad, and to Mali. It is also very true that what happened in north of Mali is very much connected to the type of trafficking in weapons. It is also very true that they are connected very much to Al-Qaeda. I think those who revolted in the north of Mali have taken the advantage of the gap that existed because unfortunately, the preventive diplomacy has not worked the way it should be. Had it been the case that I were NATO or the European Union or the countries concerned in the north, had it been the case they have thought about the implications of the war in Libya, probably what we have witnessing at the moment would have not been at the level that we are witnessing at the moment. Preventive diplomacy is extremely important, and I feel a little bit concerned because the United Nations at this particular moment is not paying that much attention to the preventive diplomacy. I can tell you also that with the situation in Lebanon, I was reading an article 8 months ago talking about the consequences of the Syrian situation. One of what has been written on Lebanon is exactly what's happening today. Had it been the case that the international community paid attention to preventive diplomacy, Lebanon would have not reached this stage of spreading conflict in Lebanon. The third issue, Mr. Ambassador, that you mentioned is the spillout of Salafists. In Libya at the moment, we are concerned about some of the religious elements that are starting to be active. It's not yet, it is serious, but given the fact, the vulnerability of the borders, and yet we have not had total control of the borders, there are some moves. And perhaps you have read about the people who fled from Algeria inside Libya and the borders with Algeria, and there were some Al-Qaeda elements. Some of them, I think, were killed, and the others were caught. One of them was Libyan, and the other one was Algerian. So in a way, the movement across the borders continue to be there, and we have to give particular attention to those Al-Qaeda elements and extremists, because if we continue to see that the weapons are there, and some foreign interventions of Al-Qaeda, not to speak of the fact that the sub-region in the Sahara is extremely vulnerable, but the international community continue to focus on the security dimension without focusing on the development dimension. We have really to combine the two approaches in order to be able to deal with the conflicts in the sub-Sahara region. I think, Mr. Ambassador, this is what I can say at this particular moment.
Mr. Volker?
Yes, thank you very much, and I have to apologize because after that, what I'm going to say now, I have to leave immediately because boarding from my plane is at 5 o'clock, which is rather soon. So on Turkey, the Turkish ambassador, of course, this morning already said that Turkey doesn't want to be a model, that you want to be a source of inspiration, or you are... Yeah. Right.
But if those who want to be, to give us, to want a hand from us, of course we will not. But,
I guess there is no dispute. There is no dispute. What I want to say is something else. That for those people who are speaking about Turkey as a model in the Arab world, there are so many Turkeys. I mean, they are not sure which Turkey they want to be their model. So we have the Muslim brothers who say, well, they want to be the AKP or like the AKP. You have a lot of business people in Egypt or other places who say, well, for them, Turkey is a model because it opened up to the European Union. Then you even have people from the military or people close to the military who say, well, Turkey is a model for us because it took 20 years between military, the end of military, actually between a military coup and sort of the parliamentarization of security policy. So everybody sees something different in Turkey, and everybody looks at Turkey and says, well, this part of Turkey is what we want, and this part of Turkey is what we want, or that part of Turkey is what we want, ignoring that there are certain very specific circumstances to Turkey, like a long institutional history, strong civil society, etc., which is not there in all of the countries or among all of the parties and forces who are speaking of Turkey as a source of inspiration or a model. I think it is good that Turkey has an influence, that Turkey is there, it can do a lot of good. I would wish, and Turkey is part of the common market, but it is not yet part of the European Union. I would wish we could associate our foreign policies towards this common neighborhood. I'm speaking of the European Union and Turkey with one another much more closely, because I think there is a lot of space here to cooperate better and more intensively for the good of the common neighborhood. Let me say one, and with that I conclude, one sentence of Syria, because that is something that hurts me personally a lot. I lived there for a couple of years, a life ago, but anyway, and I never expected that Syria actually would fall into civil war. I thought that the institutions, civil society, and even the government, which I thought was bad, but not so bad, would avoid a situation like this. Now, unfortunately, we're heading for civil war. What should we do? I think it's not upon us to decide what is coming out of it. What we should do is try to help, and maybe we're going to help different forces in Syria to be able to reconstitute a state and a society when this struggle is over. We are, at my institute, we are working with a major part of the Syrian opposition, not in order to decide who is going to be president or prime minister or in the parliament, but actually to help them develop blueprints about things that our friend from Libya spoke about: transitional justice. What are we going to do with the police? How do we have a common ground to agree upon? And of course, that would mean agreement also between people who are in the bureaucracy today, or who have a position in the military or in the police today, and those who are outside of power and who are struggling today. And I think it's a common objective, a common task for us in the international community to make sure that, and that sounds probably not very nice as a last word, but still it's serious, to make sure that the civil war in Syria after the fall of the regime will not be longer and fiercer than the civil war before the fall of the regime. Thank you very much.
Volker, thank you very much for your excellent contribution. I'm sorry that you have to leave early, but thank you very much for the excellent contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks again. All the best. We'll be in touch.
The floor is now open. In the back there.
Walter Kemp from IPI. We were talking this morning about some of the vulnerabilities and the tipping point, and the case was mentioned of the vendor in Tunisia who was upset about corruption. We're talking about structural or cosmetic changes. Can you tell us a bit about what kind of structural changes might have to come into some of these new governments in order to prevent the type of corruption which was one of the triggers for the uprisings? And perhaps based on your experience in UNODC, you can tell us a bit about the process of asset recovery in Libya, but perhaps some of the other regimes in the neighborhood.
Prince Zaid. Here.
Thank you very much. Zaid Ragd Al-Hussein, the Jordanian ambassador to the UN. I have a question for Vladimir. We have long grown accustomed at the UN to hear from our Russian colleagues and our Chinese colleagues the invocation of international law. as if the only ruling or only rule in international law is the non-interference rule, the sovereignty invocation. But there is also superior law. There is law that reaches a level of jus cogens, amongst which you have, for instance, the Torture Convention that has reached this level of superior law, well accepted now under customary rules and codified. When you have reports emerging from the UN that there is systematic torture, then, and you use the double veto, is that not also an abrogation of your obligations erga omnes? I mean, there is other law, and why do our Chinese and Russian colleagues only focus on one rule and not the others?
Thank you, Ambassador of Turkey. Here.
I just want to bring a further clarification. Of course, I'm very much proud of Turkey being presented as a model, and I thank for all the comments in this respect. But as I have said this morning, every country has different dynamics, and this is the reason why we said we do not want to impose any model of ourselves, but if there is any need for us in any way, we're ready to help, but we can be an inspiration because our dynamics are different. Just to give an example, the first representative parliament in Turkey was inaugurated in 1876. So Turkey was the first Muslim country to have a parliament, and since then we have this parliamentary experience. Secondly, there is this unchangeable item of our constitution, which is secularism. And secularism is enshrined in the society, in the institutions, and in that respect, when we talk of any political party, we never talk with any religious reference. The ruling party included. The ruling party, the Prime Minister himself, calls the party and the party members as conservative Democrats. And if those who have followed his visit to Egypt and Libya in September 2011, in the speech he made, which in my opinion was very important, he underlined the importance of secularism and the equidistance of state to every religion, which started a debate, I would say, in that region. So we also, as today, they are very much, I would say, universal values. We have also, our institutions have embraced not only democracy, rule of law, freedom of conscience, entrepreneurship. So these, I would say, these instruments which our democracy has succeeded to achieve can always be an inspiration. And we are very much proud and very much looking forward, if we can, to be helpful in that respect. This is the reason why I said we're not imposing in any way a model, but trying to help the new transition period in institution building and in the economic welfare of the countries concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask the two panelists to answer very briefly, but to add to what Prince Zaid Vladimir,
Yes.
In the question of Yemen, you did support regime change in Yemen and transfer of power in the presidential statement of the Security Council. In that case, sovereignty was not a problem. But here in the Syrian case, you are raising the question that it is a sovereign right of the people. But the Security Council supported in a presidential statement transfer of power as stipulated in the Gulf Initiative on Yemen. and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much.
We enjoy your discussion.
No,
That's
I
why we are
understand.
asking a lot of questions.
What you
That's
said.
why.
Well, of course, the decision was adopted in the Security Council. I agree with that regarding Yemen. But in any case, I again return to my explanation that, first of all, all these decisions were discussed in the group of friends and by the initiative of the Persian Gulf countries. Including Syrian representatives of the government, and that all ideas that were approved by Security Council were going there, were transferred to Security Council from Yemeni authorities themselves, from Yemeni people, and not from someone who gave this idea, for instance, from Russia or from anybody else. First, the second, you asked many questions. First was a question about corruption. We didn't mention, say that. I would like to say that, of course, Syria or any other Arab countries, including Russia, we have problems with corruption, and there is no country without corruption. Corruption is the holy thing. That is, of course, well known. Well, but of course, that is painful. Speaking about Syria, of course, it's a painful thing, and as well as the problem of torture convention that you mentioned. It's one of the problems that, of course, violation of human rights in Syria and as well as torture. That is one of the problems on which we, the group of problems on which we are talking with Syrians every day. We are, I mean, Russian government in contact with Syrian government day and night. Our ambassador is visiting foreign minister approximately one time a day. Well, we explaining to them, we trying to convince them to invite or not to permit access to the country representatives of different international commissions, including the Commission for Human Rights of the Committee of Human Rights of United Nations. It's not so easy. I can tell you frankly that it's not so easy to contact and to convince independent country. They have their view, their position, explanations. Syria, in any case, it's independent country. We should recognize it, and they have their view. But we continue this job. We absolutely sure that the problem of torture, for instance, the Torture Convention, should be investigated in Syria, and not only torture from the side of the government in their prisons, for instance, but from opposition, because Syrians told us they have a lot of huge number of facts of torture of opposition against the Syrian people and the Syrian soldiers. So all these issues should be considered from all sides and comprehensively, I would like to say. It needs time. It needs, first of all, peaceful situation. And I again repeat my thesis, and thesis is very simple, like, I know, like a water. We should stop bloodshed. We should stop clashes. We should stop violence in Syria immediately now, and not by force, by political decisions, by political measures. We should do it now, and only after that, this will open the way for settlement all other issues, including humanitarian, human rights, torture, and all other things. Now, in the situation of military confrontation, it's absolutely impossible to understand who is beating whom. Let's first of all stop it. Help us. We Russians do our best. But we waiting from the world to do the same. Unfortunately, we are in minority. Again, I say it. I should recognize it. We are in minority. No one is helping us. More than many countries making obstacles to us, in encouraging opposition to resist, giving money to them, giving support to them, giving weapons to them, giving everything to them, convincing them that they are already ruling the country or running the country. And of course, professor from London, or professor of businessman from London, or professor from Paris University, he can be new president of Syria. Why not? But does he has the rights for that? Only Syrian people should decide, not he himself or group of friends. That's all.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. There are two questions from my former colleague from RODC, and he is now with the International Peace Institute. One is in relation to the asset recovery. The asset recovery had three main problems. One is political, the other one is technical, and the third is the bank secrecy. From the record, what we have at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, we have about $168 billion as assets abroad. And we have started communicating with many countries who do have these assets. Some of them did give us indications that are prepared to return these assets. Some of them claim that they have to go through a process because their system is different from our system. And therefore, we need political support for the asset recovery issue. We need the technical aspect because there are some requirements for us to apply for an asset to return. There are specific requirements for this type of requests. And here we need the technical assistance of STAR in particular, UNODC and the World Bank. And the third is to what extent that this bank secrecy business could be a little bit flexible enough for us to know a little bit more about our assets abroad. I would like also to add that based on the information that we have at the moment, there are at least over $160 billion investment of Libya abroad. Until now, we don't know exactly what type of returns that these type of investments are. Part of them, yes, we know. The other part, we don't know. There are three kinds of investment, and this is why it's very much related to corruption. There are country-to-country investment. There are some individuals and companies, Libyan companies doing business abroad. The other part, which is more serious in terms of investment, is they're being conducted or done under certain names we don't know. Only through volunteers or intelligence service that we know exactly what kind of investment that we know. Situation is very serious. According to the Transparency International report, as you know, unfortunately, Libya among those with the most corrupt in the past. It was very hard for us because the corruption was political, was administrative, was financial, not to speak of the fact it reached also the human rights sector. And therefore, one of the challenges for us in the future, given the fact that Libya has ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, one of the most challenging part for us is to see to what extent we can really combat corruption effectively. And I would say also that fighting corruption should not be seen in isolation from establishing a humane and effective criminal justice system that is capable of trying corrupt people. Without having a criminal justice system in place, which is humane and effective, it will be a joke to say that we can fight corruption. And therefore, fighting corruption should not be seen in isolation from this judicial reform and criminal justice reform in Libya.
Thank you, Mohammed. We will do one more round of questions because we have an early dinner, and obviously I want you to rest for a few minutes before we start our early dinner at 5:30, but in the back there.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Taraf Abagajati, board member of the Platform for Intercultural Europe. And I was born in Syria, and my heart is bleeding for Syria. And I agree with you, Mr. Vladimir, with half what you said. Totally against militarization and violence, totally against military intervention, and totally against confessional and religious conflicts. But I do not agree with you that Russia is playing now an important role which is weighted from power of the world. And also strategically, I think that Russia is doing a lot of mistakes, allow me to say that. You are giving the President Bashar al-Assad the impression that he has the support, the total support of the Russian government, even for years. And I think this is the error. Mr. Bashar Assad needs a telephone from Vladimir Putin who say the game is over. This is what Syria needs now from Russia. I think it's very important that Russia play its role strategically in its own benefit and power in Syria, and do not say that you are playing a neutral role. This is, nobody would believe that, and I think the time is coming that Russia should realize that the Syrian people is the friend of Russia and not the regime. And you were speaking about the governments. There is no governments in Syria. You know that it is not the issue of Walid Ma'alem or Buthayna Sha'ban or whatever. It is the issue of the clique of the president, Maher al-Assad and Asif Shawkat and those people. And they even do not sit with you to solve this problem. And this is, I think, here can Russia play a very big role, not having the opposition in Moscow, but going from Moscow, not just to the regime, but also to the civil society and to Syrian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Here.
Bucher, Austrian Ministry of Defense. I address myself also to the Russian panelist, Mr. Dedushki. We took note of that, what you said, your position, but we also take note of the reports from OCHA, UNDP, military attachés, diplomats. There is atrocities ongoing, and when atrocities are ongoing, there are victims. We hear about hundreds of thousands internally displaced persons. What is Russia trying to do to help the situation there, to ameliorate the situation there, to allow impeded access for humanitarian aid? Are you prepared to allow unimpeded access of humanitarian aid through the Red Crescent or to which organization ever? Where is your assistance in that respect? Thank you.
The ambassador here.
I just wanted to comment on Syria. Everything is being said and our position is well known. But I just want to remind that the responsibility to protect, which you have alluded to, was a UN resolution which everybody agreed to, and the tragedy ongoing on the ground, which we are all witnessing, 10,000 already dead, unfortunately. 1 million internally displaced, hundreds of thousands in prisons, hundreds of thousands in neighboring countries, and we don't know how many more will be. Only on the 20th, I read, 48 people were dead, were killed. I do agree, of course, with the Russian panelist that bloodshed should stop, and this should be a Syrian-led transition. But when we look at the plight of the people, we should not forget near history. Bosnia is near history. And the international community waited 2-3 years until, well, that genocide was taking place, until Srebrenica. I'm not talking about any intervention, but we cannot just close our eyes to the plight of the people. And the Friends of Syria is, I think, about 60, 70 countries, is to show their solidarity with the Syrian people. That's all about it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to take the floor before we close it?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions for His Excellency from the Libyan government. One, I think about the reconciliation process. How fast is it moving and what mechanisms are being used? I think, are we using African internal traditional mechanisms in addition to the legal processes? I think that's very important. We have a lesson from South Africa which we can apply. That's one. Second, I think there is this problem of relinking or re-establishing a very positive relationship with the African Union. I know some processes have already started. How strong are we in terms of our relationship with the African Union? One more point, the sub-Saharan African population in Libya has faced a number of problems, and how are you addressing those grievances, concerns of the, especially the sub-Saharan African population already in the country? Thank you.
Thank you. We start with Mohammed this time.
Yes, please. In relation to the national reconciliation, on the positive side, the Transitional Council, the National Transitional Council, has already approved the law on national reconciliation and transitional justice. But enacting the law and implementing it is something else. You may enact a law, you may sign an agreement, you may ratify a treaty, but if that particular law or treaty has not put into practice, it becomes meaningless. The reality on the ground is that national reconciliation will really take time, as I mentioned earlier, because of the atrocities, because of the rape cases. The patriotism now is being translated in the local street as being anti-Gaddafi or pro-Bashir. The emotions are very high. And if there is any single official Libyan that can tell you that the national reconciliation will be implemented within certain close period of time, it's not true. The national reconciliation will be a process that takes time. We have taken into account the experience in South Africa, some experiences from Latin America, some experiences from Asia. We have held 3 conferences on national reconciliation, but today they do it very beautiful. National reconciliation of Libya will not be successful unless the chief of tribes and those people who know the specificity and the social context of the Libyan community, unless they are fully involved, national reconciliation will not be implemented. Second point, you mentioned about the establishing relations with Africa. The previous regime used to bribe and buy. And this was one of the worst policies as far as the Libyan foreign affairs issues are concerned. Now we'd like to approach our relations with our African brothers and sisters. We'd like to approach it with dignity and mutual respect. And we are giving particular attention to the development dimension, particularly with the neighboring countries. Because if there is a way in the future to live together, is to have this sense of called partnership. But it's not a partnership of interest. It's a so-called solidarity partnership. That these are our brothers, and we have to live together, and we have to help each other. And in the foreign affairs at the moment, we are conceptualizing a new policy as far as diplomatic relations, as far as the development aspect of our relations. One of the issues I would like to mention to you, we have about 42 embassies in Africa. Even the most advanced country in the world does not have this language, because some of these representations quite for personal reasons, not for the interest of A or B given country. We have to go to support increasing our presence, but only we have to expand and strengthen our quality relations as far as investment in Africa is concerned. Now, in relation to the nationals of Sub-Saharan Africa, we have 2 kinds of people. We have those who took part in the war, and this is documented. Some of them fled the country, and some remain there. They are in camps at the moment. I would say detention centers. Some of them are not under the control of the government at the moment. and those are waiting for a trial, hopefully as soon as the judicial system is put in place, and we are capable of providing for a trial is put in place. And the others who are fled the country as laborers, now we are thinking seriously to what extent that we can reopen the door again for those. And in fact, we have about now 300,000 Africans who remain. They have not fled, who remain at the moment, and living in various cities, and they're still working. And we do consider them an integral part of the labor community in Libya. So I hope you understand the emotional aspect of it. But on the other hand, there is the reality that the national reconciliation will take place. And as I mentioned this morning, the challenge is how to convince our people, the freedom fighters, to be tolerant of the past and atrocities, and how to convince who are criminals to be able to apologize. This is really the challenge that we are going to see.
Thank you, Mohammed. Vladimir?
Well, many questions. I have time?
You have a brief time.
A lot.
But time you have, but brief.
Well, thank you. Many interesting questions. And you see such a first question from a Syrian citizen who was born in Syria. I can tell you frankly that myself, I love Syrian people. I dealt with Syrian people personally. I served in Syrian army as a military interpreter in 74, 75. That is because we're helping Syrian people to fight against Israel at that period. Well, so I know their families, I know people, I know how they're thinking, I know their psychology. It's wonderful people, one of the best people in the Middle East. And I love them all. Well, but I can tell you one thing, that we never give to Syrian authorities or regime, you can call them as you like, what is more pleasant for you. We never try to show them that we are helping a regime, trying to save a regime. No, it's wrong. My minister, Lavrov, many times, 3 times I think, he said that we are not only advocates of the regime. For us, it's absolutely the same who will be the next leader of this country. We don't afraid that we lose any economic interest in Syria. We have now good cooperation with them, military, economic, because our niche will be always waiting for us. We are absolutely sure. We have a great army of Russian wives here in Syria, about 30,000. Well, and maybe 100,000 people who with the Russian passports. So that is why we know what we do in this country. I can tell you that I meet many people coming from Syria with absolutely another point of view, not like you. And they said that you are doing correct, your position is right, saying Syrian people coming to Moscow, they're organizing demonstrations in Moscow in support of Russian position. And these demonstrations already took place 3 or 4 times. Well, you see, so it is not so easy to say what is correct, what is not correct. I would like to say that in accordance with our assessment, about no less than 50% of Syrian population sympathizing to Syrian government. Not all of them are their enemies, as opposition abroad is trying to explain. It's wrong. People went and voted in favor of constitution. And it was referendum. It was 80%. Okay, you don't believe it was falsification. Okay, not 80%. Let it be 40%. But it is a lot. People went to the elections. It's elections of parliamentary elections took place 7th of February, not so long ago. Again, half of population voted. Maybe it's falsification completely. Okay, I agreed with you. But people went and they did it and they participated. They didn't ignore elections. Why? Of course, you will say they're afraid. That is why they are going to the poll stations. It's very simple explanations. Syrian society is difficult and how to say not so easy to make fast and quick conclusions about position of different Syrian people. So society is splitted. That is why you see it's not so easy to say. And the Russian position, you know, I told you about our position. We are absolutely sure that we can find solution quickly. I want to answer here the question of Turkey ambassadors. That is, of course, bloodshed, and of course it's very bad and should be stopped, and Bosnia. But you should also remember how NATO is bombing Belgrade. And Serbians will never forget it. And you know the problem of Kosovo. That is results of all the settlement of United Nations that we supported decisions. Russia didn't support decision for Kosovo because it was for its independence. We supported resolution for settlement. But at the same time, Kosovo declared independence. It was a mistake. Again, mistake after mistake. And the European Union supported this idea. It's wrong. Many mistakes. So you see, unfortunately, I cannot agree with you that we should act very quickly right now to stop everything. And we are ready to do it, but you should, I mean, West world and Arab world, including Turkey, you should do something also to convince opposition to conduct negotiations with the authorities. It is necessary to do right now, to convince them not to say that regime is not available, that it's empty chair. Assad chair is empty. He's here, he's available. He has 400,000 army. He's available. He's not going anywhere. He's not disappeared. He's not flying to the moon. And it is a mistake if somebody thinking that someone is going to convince President Bashar to go to the moon. No. He's standing in his post and he feels himself, I can convince you, he feels himself very well, without any problems. So we should take it into account and to understand it and what to do and how to settle with this issue. Not try to simplify it. Not try to simplify it. Well, then another question also about very important issue. You asked about humanitarian access to Syria. I would like to say that humanitarian access to Syria is the part of Kofi Annan plan. And so far, Syrians didn't fulfill their obligation in this paragraph of the plan. We, Russians, again, it's to you also, we never try to defend Syrians if they do something wrong, if they don't fulfill their obligation of humanitarian. So we recognize it. The problem is where? The problem is that Syrians are ready to allow access of humanitarian organizations to Syria, but they would like to control distribution of all products that they will bring. They would like themselves control distribution, not to permit international organizations themselves to control to whom to give and to whom not to give. Syrians would like to control, to put their hand on that. That is only one technical issue. I hope that this problem will be settled quickly. We do our best to do it. That is a reply for humanitarian issue. Yes, and yes, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, I think.
Clarification about when I gave the example of
Bosnia.
I said at the beginning I don't mean any kind of intervention. I just mean closing eyes and looking with I would say quote and unquote. I'm specifically indicating the Bosnian example without necessary interest, a little bit of ignorance, while all that drama and events were evolving.
Okay.
I'm not talking about any kind of intervention. This is the problem of the international community. And
Okay.
whatever will be done will be decided internationally.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
But I think, but I don't.
I'm ambassador of Kosovo, and I have to say
It's fine.
But this is not a question. This is an observation. It does not require an answer. Go ahead.
Thank you very much about that. Maybe I understand your position, and I would say that the people of Kosovo is very happy, 90% of them, that Kosovo is an independent country. We have no 90 countries that recognize Kosovo, and we hope, and I think Russian will have in the next years the same position we wait of recognition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is an observation, and our topic is the Arab Spring, not Kosovo.
No,
but
if you allow me to say something.
But look, I think we have to wrap this up. I think what this discussion did is allow us to see where each power stands in terms of the development in the area. And I want to thank Vladimir for answering the questions and taking the time to come from Moscow and to enrich this discussion. And I thank you, Mohammed, for an excellent presentation. And I personally care very much about Libya. And thank you very much. I think it was an excellent panel. And I think it remains that we should express our appreciation to the panelists for their good contribution.
Thank you.